Number 10. Uncle Ben. I figured we'd kick this list off with a fresh, tragic reminder of how Spider-Man came to be in the first place. I'm really glad the MCU didn't make us sit through this scene again. In Spider-Man's first comic book appearance, Amazing Fantasy issue 15, Peter's life changes a lot in those 35 pages. He gets bitten by a radioactive spider, giving him life-changing, incredible abilities. He makes some cash, taking down some wrestlers. He literally gets scouted by a TV producer after just one gig. He learns how to shoot webs. He makes a sweet outfit, makes a sweet appearance on a sweet TV show. This guy's literally offered movie roles, interviews, tons of money, and Peter at this point is now just cocky as hell. He's like, "Hey, I call my agent, boys, I'm busy." And then a thief runs by and he doesn't do a single thing about it because he's through being pushed around. Okay, great. Well, you know the drill. That same thief was the guy who ended up taking Uncle Ben's life. You played yourself, Pete. Number 9. Armed and Dangerous. In the Amazing Spider-Man issue 100, we find Peter on the streets, webbing up some bad guys, just a usual Thursday night. Now at this point, he's getting tired of New Yorkers looking at him like he's the criminal. He's kind of done being with Spider-Man, so he wants to hang up the spandex and settle down with Gwen Stacy. Now in order for this to happen, Peter needs to get rid of Spider-Man completely. And so he begins working on a serum that will strip him of his powers. He doesn't even test it out either. He just mixes it up and then gulp right down the hatch. Okay, he's brave. Whatever happens, I did it for you, Gwen. I wonder if that includes growing 4 extra arms. Yeah, those back massages just got way better in the Parker household. It's a funny couple of issues. I mean, some panels with Peter having extra naked arms in the frame, it does look a little bit odd. Only after making a new serum with Morbius's blood did Peter go back to normal. Number 8. One More Day. This 4-parter began back in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, and instead of Peter dealing with thugs or giant lizards, he's now dealing with the devil, Mephisto. Now we thought he was the one pulling the strings in WandaVision, and some still believe that he's pretending to be Doctor Strange in the No Way Home trailer, some being me, perhaps, I'll never tell. And it's because of this comic that makes us think this stuff. This takes place after Civil War, right after Spider-Man reveals his identity to the public, so now villains are going after him. So when a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he feels guilty beyond imagination. So this looks like a job for the devil. Mephisto appears in the form of a young girl and lures Spider-Man away to offer him a deal. Mephisto tells Peter that he can save Aunt May, but the payment also has to be pretty high caliber. He doesn't want Peter's soul or anything like that. Instead, he wants his marriage. So they agree as long as Peter's secret identity becomes a secret again. So right before Mephisto alters reality, he tells the couple that the young girl that he appeared as was actually their future daughter, adding insult to injury. Peter wakes up the next day alone with Aunt May alive, score, and the world doesn't know who Spider-Man is. I think this is a win. I think it's a loss. I'm not sure what to call this, but either way, my heart hurts. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to give us a thumbs up, you know the drill. If you're loving this content, or if you want a part 2, hit that thumbs up, comment down below, give us all the love, and then we'll give it all back. You guys are amazing. Now back to this list. Number 7, Doc Swap. The Dying Wish storyline begins in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 698. Peter gets a priority call from the Avengers, and when he meets them at the raft, Cap and the team are waiting. He tells Peter an old enemy of his is not looking too shabby and he probably won't make it. Peter knows off the bat already that it's Doc Ock. He just knows it somehow. Incredible. So he asks everybody for a moment alone, just them two. So everybody leaves, and that's when Doc Ock starts saying some really weird stuff. He's like, "Peter Parker, but I'm Peter Parker." And then Spider-Man responds with even more confusing dialogue. He's like, "Nope, not anymore. From now on, I'm Spider-Man." And readers are like, what's going on right now? Did I miss a page? What's happening? This is by far one of the worst days for Peter because now he's trapped in Doc's old decaying body, waiting as the hours go by to literally die, while Doc Ock spends a night or two in Peter's advanced, healthier body. Number 6, Spider-Man, Look Who's Home. Beginning with Amazing Spider-Man 365, Peter discovers that his parents, who have been dead for quite some time, are back. Nice. And he believes it for a hot minute. And by hot minute, I mean this goes on for like 20 issues. It's wild. Aunt May gets a private investigator because she feels like something is just not quite right about this. Peter, on the other hand, feels so comfortable that he decides to tell his parents, you know, who have been in a Russian camp for 20 years, sure, that he is in fact Spider-Man. This guy's spilling huge secrets already. Okay, this is odd. And then in issue 388, we learn that they're actually robots. Nice one, Chameleon. You fooled us again. He's so good with his robots. Number 5, Spider or Man. So Peter has grown extra arms before, but I don't think anything was worse than his transformation in the Spectacular Spider-Man Disassembled storyline. Adriana Soria, aka the Spider Queen, saw Spider-Man as a potential mate, of course, so she forced a kiss upon Parker, and after some time passed, he began turning into a literal spider. So gross. Starting with growing an extra set of eyes, which is, it's kind of funny. Peter can feel himself change as well during this, which is pretty, dare I say, humorous at times, because this dude is now craving fly soup, and he's growing bristle hair in places you don't want to grow bristle hair. The best part is that MJ still makes this guy go to a wedding despite his transformations. He doesn't stick around too long, obviously, because he starts to panic and change even more, so now he's just swinging around the city, not even sure what he's doing. He can't think or breathe, but he knows that the Queen is calling him. His body starts to then change even more until eventually he's, a literal human spider. MJ's like, hey, you're fine, it's an open bar. What could go wrong? Let's go dance. Number 4, an eye for an eye. In Spider-Man The Other, Evolve or Die, Part 6 features a specific injury to Parker that lives in my head rent-free. Part 6, The Reckoning, kicks off with Morlun and Spider-Man going at it. They fight on the roof of the Bugle, and then eventually they crash inside the actual office. It's pretty exciting. Peter tries to take the fight elsewhere, as there's too many innocent people around, like say, I don't know, Peter's boss, for example. Peter is trying everything, and Morlun isn't even breaking a sweat. Morlun then yanks out Peter's left eye right out of the socket, and then to make us feel even more sick, he eats it like a cherry tomato. Yum. Number 3, Kraven's Last Hunt. Released back in 1987, Kraven's Last Hunt is one of the best Spider-Man stories to this day. The 6-parter begins with Kraven shooting Spider-Man with a tranquilizer and then burying him alive. Now, if that already didn't sound horrible enough, Kraven suited up as the webhead and became a better version of Spider-Man. Yeah, his version would save the day by brutally attacking criminals with the help of Vermin as a creepy sidekick. 2 weeks go by before Peter wakes up underground. He then chases down Kraven, but after Vermin almost takes Peter out, Kraven reveals that his hunting days are since done. While Peter chases down Vermin, Kraven literally retires. This guy goes home, he leaves a confession tape that he buried Spider-Man and took the suit, all that jazz, and then Kraven takes his own life. It's bizarre, but once you start this story, it's quite literally impossible to put down. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. This one we saw on screen in 2014, and honestly, I don't care how you felt about the Andrew Garfield movies, this scene slapped. It was wild. My throat was so tight, like the last time I cried in a movie theater was probably Bridge to Terabithia and then The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I'm being honest. I'm opening up to you guys. The Amazing Spider-Man issue 121 and 122 are titled Turning Point and The Goblin's Last Stand. These issues shocked readers. At this point in the comics, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, had forgotten who Spider-Man really was due to amnesia. Meanwhile, his son Harry was not in great shape as well. He was undergoing detoxification. He was having some substance abuse issues, so Norman was now stressing hard. Financial problems, family problems. He eventually had a mental breakdown, and all of a sudden he remembered his dark goblin side, and also he remembered who Spider-Man really was. His first target was Gwen Stacy. You gotta attack the heart, right? Peter meets them on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. He throws his hardest hits, but when Gwen is thrown over the side of the bridge, Peter can't catch her at the right angle, and in turn, her neck snaps because of the falling momentum. It shocked readers and it shocked viewers. Like I said, a lot of tightness in the throat. Number 1, Peter's death. Moving on over to the Ultimate Comics, the death of Spider-Man is obviously one of the bigger ones on this list. So when Peter gets a call from MJ saying that Norman has escaped prison, he knows his family is at risk. And this was also happening while the New Ultimates and the Ultimate Avengers were going at it. So while Peter was trying to handle his own problems, he saw that the Punisher was taking aim at Captain America. So he jumped in the way, being a hero, and literally took a bullet for him. As if that wasn't already a rough night, Osborn and the crew are now gearing up to take the battle to Peter's front steps. Peter barely holds on during this fight. He's asking bystanders to call 911. He's not feeling great at all. And come issue 160, the Goblin lays one final blow, and that's the last we see of Ultimate Peter Parker. Number 10, drugged and tortured. Classic. Those are two things you never want to happen to you. In that order either. Age of Ultron was an event that went down in 2013, and I gotta tell you, nothing is worse than waking up and realizing you slept past your alarm. You feel panicked, you feel all hot in your chest, you feel stupid, and you still feel tired. And worst of all, you don't even get any more rest. It's just stress and anxiety all in one ball. But how about sleeping through the end of the world? Yeah, that's right. That's exactly where Peter Parker's story begins in all of this Ultron madness. He wakes up and the world is in ruins. Desperate to help and find answers, he hits the streets, only to be drugged and kidnapped by Ultron's goons. He then waited, badly beaten, to be sold to Ultron. So it's bad, it's getting worse and worse. So after a daring rescue from Hawkeye, the team actually is frustrated with Hawkeye and Peter. Tony walks over to use some tech just to make sure he's all right, but in doing so could potentially compromise their secret location. Damn you, Tony even says to him. Sad. Imagine if Tony said damn you to you, you'd be like, oh, please. And before we go on to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at our studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Okay, back to some sad Spider-Man times. Number 9, Aunt May. This time a little bit different, but still the same. So with Miles Morales breaking the internet more and more every day with Spider-Man 3 rumors, and of course the Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's fair to look back on the saddest part of that first PS4 game. Peter is faced with the ultimate hero scenario. If he uses the antidote to save Aunt May, there won't be enough to save everybody else from the Devil's Breath bioagent. And it's really well done. I mean, many gamers, including myself, definitely shed a tear at this point. My throat got tight. I was like, hey, skip, I don't want to see it.
What if we use it to cure someone right now?
Then there won't be enough to cure the others.
So when the game was being made, interestingly enough, the big ups didn't want them to kill Aunt May at first. But then once they saw the flow of the story and how things were playing out, they simply said, you can kill Aunt May, you've earned it.
You earned a pardon.
Number 8, Bike Messenger.
Why, Peter, you're bleeding.
Oh, yeah. I stepped off a curb and got clipped by one of those bike messengers.
Yeah, for sure, a bike messenger did that to your arm, not razor blades made by the Green Goblin. Yeah, so this dinner scene is anxiety central. Similar energy to when Michael Keaton's Vulture is grilling Peter on the way to the dance. Yeah, that injury is one of many in the Spider-Man trilogy, but it's the location of the injury that gets Peter in the most amounts of trouble. Right on his arm, front and center. It was this moment where Norman Osborn realizes that he's Spider-Man. If only you sat on his left, would have been smooth sailing. Come on, man, you have senses. Your right is my left, you gotta flip it, here you go. Number 7, impaled from a glider. So in the movie, it's a well-timed backflip that ends up taking out Norman Osborn. And the best part is, Norman does that to himself. He's like, and then he goes, whoo, and gets it. It's awesome. His own glider kills him. What a life lesson right there. Don't be a dick. So stupid. Like no one's there, I'm like, sorry. Well, in the comics, it went down a little bit differently. See, Ben Reilly was a clone, of course, created by the Jackal and went by the name of the Scarlet Spider. And it was him who in fact got smoked by this glider, causing his death immediately afterwards, revealing that Ben Reilly is indeed the clone. Number 6, he loses a leg. I have a great arm and leg joke at the end of this one. Here we go. It took me an hour, I'm like, that's it. Peter Parker, this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. So this happened about 2 years after the birth of his daughter, May, and the incident was so horrific for Peter that he quit. Yeah, he stopped being Spider-Man, which is sad. But then cut to many years later, May Parker grows up and puts on the suit herself. And she looks pretty badass. We love the MC2 universe. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and a cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Too bad she didn't run into any legs dealers. Number 5, rocked. Okay, we've seen Thanos throw a moon at the Avengers. We've seen him snap away half of the Avengers and half of all living creatures, in fact. But hand to hand, the Mad Titan is still brutal. We look back now on the Infinity Gauntlet event. This was a wild ride. I mean, Wolverine's bones turn into rubber, Cyclops gets smothered by a clear block, Iron Man gets his head cut off. It's violent, it's spicy. And then Spider-Man, we see him get a face full of rock. Yeah, Traxia straight up beats him to death and then finishes him with a rock. That's some like caveman stuff right there. I mean, at least Thanos made the deaths of the other Avengers somewhat quick. I mean, come on guys. I feel like if I had to pick one way to go with Thanos, I would much rather be turned into dust than having a rock here. This is already messed up enough, we don't want that. Number 4, he exploded. Yeah, so we touched on Marvel Zombies in part 2 or 3 or 1. We lose track here, okay? Spider-Man's had a rough go. But in Marvel Zombies Return, we see Spider-Man after he gets transported to another world. Classic. But this time, the field trip goes dark when Spider-Man realizes he's in the past. So there's a lot of zombie stuff on the up and up. So the zombie Spider-Man in this world ends up having some of Sandman's crew for lunch. So Sandman gets out of Dodge, right? But upon doing this, he bumps into the Spider-Man and he's like, oh, you again, you're not eating me, buddy. And then Sandman puts himself into Spider-Man's mouth, which is kind of like eating him, idiot. Which already, worst case scenario, to have that much sand in your mouth. And then to make things even worse, Sandman then grows and moves around until he explodes out of Spider-Man. Like a gender reveal balloon. It's like, pah, it's sand. Just kidding, it's sand.
Yeah. You made a delicious sandwich. So do you. Very crunchy.
Number 3, he was crucified. That's right, in X-Men issue 191, we see our boy Pete on the front panel with the words Raiders of the Lost Temple written at the top. See, this issue is a lot of fun for everybody, but of course, Spider-Man. The issue begins with the Avengers and the X-Men trapped in this world where Kulan Gath has made everything a little bit old-fashioned, like very old-fashioned. His spell turned cars into horse-drawn carriages. It turned guns into swords, which way more fun in my opinion, and police officers turn into civic guards. The whole city becomes medieval times. It's insane. Then Spider-Man gets crucified and tortured, even admitting that he didn't think it would be possible to hurt so much. And Gath's barely begun. Yeah, he was upset. Honestly, he was one issue away from Ramsay Bolton walking in and calling him Reek instead of Pete. Going for the Game of Thrones fans, there you go. Number 2, he dies. Again. Sometimes dying is just the way to go, especially if it's loud and heroic. Maybe you're like on your knees, you're yelling, you're ripping your shirt off or something cool, some kind of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson way. You gotta do what you gotta do, even if that means dying alone with nobody to witness you being a badass. And that's exactly what happens in the story at the hands of Thanos. So once again, Thanos doesn't actually end the Spider's life in this issue. It's his own heroic actions that puts the nail in the coffin. He's going over the mental checklist of things to do. You know, classic Spidey things. Pick up Mary Jane, fill up on web fluid, deliver some mean-ass barbecue sauce to Aunt May's, the usual. And when a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that it's another walk in the park for him. That is until the cooling machine explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air. Now, seconds before his heart stops, he reflects on the fact that he always made jokes in dire times, then simply coming to realization that there are no more jokes. And crash, the barbecue sauce breaks off the ground as Spider-Man dies. Really sad, a weird barbecue sauce twist, but it actually made it seem more sad, I don't know. But it gets worse. Just wait, there's more bad. Death isn't the end, especially in Thanos' case. He meets Peter Parker and then makes him watch as the mother he tries to save yells in agony over the loss of her child. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the two, but he didn't even save the kid. Bad luck Brian over here, come on. Number 1. Let It Ring. Remember that song? It was great. Well, it's so good, man. Apple bottom jeans, boots with the fur. Alrighty, we'll finish off this list with one of my personal favorite moments of the Spider's horrible run with luck, maybe because I'm claustrophobic and this one triggered me. You've been warned. Spider-Man 300. There's a huge brawl with Venom and Spider-Man, and it's a lot of fun, right? A lot of webbing, a lot of punching and kicking and thwips. And at the beginning, Spider-Man is trying desperately to reach the Fantastic Four's Sonic Blaster, right? Just one little pew, and then we're good. Eddie Brock is doing his villain monologue stuff, and Spidey's like, yeah, keep talking, and he's trying to reach his blaster, and then Brock notices and slams him through the floor. Then Venom knocks him out, and then Spider-Man wakes up upside down. Yeah, he's webbed up to this giant bell. So when the clock strikes midnight, that heavy clapper, it's gonna kill him. It's gonna get him right in the head. It's kind of like Saw, in a way. It's really twisted. So in a last-minute attempt, Peter barely manages to squeeze his hand out, stopping the bell from ringing. But of course, it's not easy. It's only time before the constant hitting will crush the bones in his hand. And he acknowledges this too. He knows that he's in a sticky situation. After barely escaping, the bell does finally ring. And if Peter sticks around, he too would die along with Venom. So even if you win, you lose. That's life. That's how life goes. Sometimes you're stuck between a bell and a hard place. Literally. Kicking off the list at number 10, Buried by KRAVEN. In the storyline, KRAVEN's Last Hunt, published in 1987, it has quite an interesting illustration on its front page. We see a dark Spider-Man crawling out of a grave with the tombstone reading, "Here lies Spider-Man." Weird, what's going on? This 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man. So KRAVEN is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with his plan and seemingly shoots him dead. So KRAVEN buries him, and even worse, he takes Spider-Man's suit and takes his place. So now, KRAVEN's roaming New York and brutally attacking criminals, including a group that was assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer and digs himself out to freedom. Then when Spider-Man confronted KRAVEN, KRAVEN was like, "No way, buddy, I'm the real deal. I'm doing this hero gig now, not you. Get out of town. Beat it, mister." And KRAVEN releases Vermin, which is just a great character. So he attacks Peter thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. So then Peter has to now convince Vermin otherwise. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until KRAVEN intervenes. Talk about a bad couple of weeks. Yeesh. And before we continue this list, guys, if you haven't already, make sure you toss this video a thumbs up because it really helps us out here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to Spider-Man's horrible life. Number 9. Clones. The Clone Saga wasn't loved by fans. I mean, for starters, it actually lasted way too long. The Clone Saga began in 1994 and lasted until 1996, and it carried out through every single Spider-Man comic. So that entire time you were reading the issues, you were also forced to keep up with this dreadful clone plot that just wouldn't stop. And on top of that, there were these new characters and plots that were coming in every issue that it became almost a chore to retain interest. The story was set to end in Amazing Spider-Man 400 in 1995, but those early issues of the Clone Saga did so well with sales, so they decided to drag it on. One of the worst parts about all this was that fans had to find out that Ben Reilly was intended on being the real Spider-Man after all of this, and the Peter Parker we've been following for years was actually the clone. So naturally fans weren't having it, and they ended up retconning this again so that Peter was Spider-Man and Ben was still the clone. I mean, what a headache to explain, let alone be forced to read for years. And the worst part of the bunch being maximum clonage. This issue, that's when it goes the worst. So check it out, or don't. Number 8, best friend problems. It's always incredible to me when a superhero has a bully. Like, it always happens. And I mean, sure, it's a nice message to audience members not to be a bully. You know, you never know what battle somebody else is fighting at home. And it's usually a nice reveal. Like, Flash Thompson is more of a lighthearted bully in the new Spider-Man movies. He kind of looks up to Spider-Man, but he doesn't look to Peter Parker. It's a fun dynamic to play with. So when we meet Harry Osborn and see his arc, it's pretty wild. Harry initially wasn't a fan of Peter Parker in the first place. He thought he was a snob. But then he realized Peter's distance was actually due to his aunt's health problems, and the two of them ended up becoming good friends. In the 2002 Spider-Man film, we see the beginning of a best friend becoming the villain, and this time propelled by jealousy. And it was a nice relationship to see on screen. It added a lot to the film. We have James Franco playing Harry Osborn in the original trilogy, and by the time the third one rolls around, Harry is a full-on villain, sporting the new alter ego, the Green Goblin, taking the place, of course, of his father, Norman. Harry and his father's relationship was never easy breezy, even before Norman became a supervillain. So Peter was helping Harry get through problems with his father, and Spider-Man was fighting the Green Goblin. So we were treated to these layers of who knows what, and all these dynamic relationships playing in with each other. And it's what made the first Spider-Man movie so good. In the comics, when Peter and Norman finally figured out who each other really was, Norman suffered from amnesia after the fight. So Peter made up the story about how Norman was actually injured while he was helping Spider-Man fight the Green Goblin. Not a bad save. So Peter went to the hospital to check up on him, you know, see how things were going. And then Harry saw this as a sign that the two of them were friends. So sometimes your bestie gets close to you, sometimes they try and kill you with their dad's glider. You got what you got. And coming up at number 7, hit by a train. In Spider-Man Far From Home, we see Peter go toe-to-toe with Mysterio, a villain fans have been begging to see on the big screen for years. And Mysterio does a pretty good job convincing Peter that what he is seeing is real. But what Peter doesn't expect is a real-life train to hit him going really fast. There have actually been conversations online about how this hit should have killed Peter. He got hit by an Ice 3 bullet train, and one Reddit account went so far as to actually do the math on how Peter should have died with the speed and the momentum of the train. Also, that's a lot of effort. Just lie to us. Say he would have been fine. Don't tell us he would have died. Not only does this hit injure Peter, but once he slowly climbs onto the train and collapses, he's taken like almost 2,000 kilometers away to the Netherlands, where Happy has to pick him up in a field of tulips. This was a great part in the movie. I mean, seeing him lose everything and barely obtain the strength to go back and fight Mysterio again, you love to see it, we also hate to see it, you know? And number 6, extra arms. The Spider or the Man. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963, the issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them. If you don't want them, just toss them this way. Thanks. So he comes up with a solution and takes a swig. For Gwen, he adds, before downing this mix. And as we could have guessed, it doesn't go well, because it's on this list. So by the last page of the issue, we see Peter as he ends up growing 4 extra arms. Not like this, he says. No, it's happening, buddy. So the next issue focuses on Peter as he tries to get a solution for this new, not so handy problem through Michael Morbius's blood. So with the new Morbius movie with Jared Leto coming out, could we possibly see Tom Holland sport the new 6-arm look? Part of me hopes not, but I mean, anything Tom Holland does is gold, so I'm here for it. And number 5. More girl problems. Peter in his human life alone could be a sitcom. In one trilogy, we have Mary Jane as the love life, and then in Garfield's movies, we have Gwen Stacy. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are very different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. So Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's at minimum attracted to her, right? Physically. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's less interested. You gotta play it cool, Pete. Play it cool. Keep the mask on. Less talking, more masking. And number 4, the deal with the devil. The One More Day storyline is next up on our list. This is a 4-issue story, but because of delays, it took 5 months to conclude. That's a lot of waiting. I mean, we're still waiting for the Black Widow movie to come out, so I mean, it's not too bad in comparison. But still, any wait sucks. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. And instead of the usual thugs or enhanced scientist villain, we see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil. The devil, of course, being Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, people of course were after him, now knowing his true identity. So after a bullet strikes Aunt May instead of Peter, he of course feels like he's the one to blame. Even the opening of the story shows Aunt May in a hospital bed with Peter talking about how she was perfectly fine just a few days before. Like, it's dark right off the bat. So he first goes to Iron Man and gives him being the one who convinced Peter to reveal his identity in the first place. So he webs him up and gets all cool and bad cop. And it's nice to see, but it's also heartbreaking because that bullet was meant for him. Peter is feeling the guilt, and cue Mephisto. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying. So MJ adds to the pitch. So basically what happens is that the world will now forget about Peter's identity. Great. Aunt May will live. Neat. But the kicker is that MJ and Peter never got married. It's kind of like Shrek 4, except worse. So they hug one final time, and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be, and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it, me being Peter Parker, not married, and all that jazz. And all the backstory just like that was wiped out at the turn of a page. Number 3, the death of Spider-Man. When a supervillain escapes, it's not a good time. Usually they're coming back for that person that put them there in the first place. Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful and super saddening. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin and a few other bad apples that are out for revenge. And this entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, so everybody's watching. Everyone's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to safety, and he's limping around, tossing out quips, pulling off fire hydrants, and using Electro's current to like hurt everybody else. It's amazing. This is the plot that I think we'll actually see in the next Spider-Man movie in a way. So with all these villains now knowing Peter's true identity, we could get them all showing up to his house, just bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way, with Peter's heroic demise, that is. Number 2, Curtis Connors. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers a hand in a project or something, but I mean, giving them a hand literally could end up pretty bad. In the comics, Dr. Kurt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion in a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. Hence the lizard growing the tail back thing. You got it. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. We see his arm grow back, but then as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors also becomes a full-on lizard. I mean, sure, lizards can grow their tails, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage and mix it DNA, the brain can alter as well. And his story arc begins with Amazing Spider-Man 6, and it's really cool. Especially if you've seen the movie, if you haven't quite read the comics, this is a nice little backstory that they didn't explain too much. And finally, number 1. He gave MJ cancer. You heard me. In Spider-Man Dark Reign, we learn a lot what Spider-Man's powers can do. The ability to climb walls, amazing. Shoot webs, ha, how fun. But when it comes to reproducing, his DNA might just be too problematic. The story takes place 30 years in the future in an alternate universe, Earth 70237. Peter ends up visiting the grave of MJ and discovers the real reason that she died. The radioactive cells in his sperm ended up giving MJ cancer. Yeah. That's what? Peter had the choice of staying with her when she was dying or attend gunshots outside as Spider-Man. He left her, and when he came back, she had already passed away. Super sad. This made Peter vow to never become Spider-Man again. It's a pretty dark story, and the whole giving MJ cancer thing, I mean, I hope we never have to relive that on the big screen ever. Not even anytime soon, just never in general. That would be great. Number 10, one less eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, the Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Morlun put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Morlun to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8, Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. Number 7, Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Since Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these 2 twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well. And after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course, we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me." And cut to, bam.